shutdown of the U.S. government is over, but the policy fight continues. Can the White House and Congress resolve it without damaging the nation's economy and its credit rating? We ask a Republican who backed the compromise. He is on the new Budget Conference Committee, Senator Rob Portman from my home state of Ohio and my district of the eastern portion of Greater Cincinnati. He's with our chief Washington correspondent, Peter Cook. Peter, good morning.
Sarah, thanks very much. I am joined by Senator Portman. You know more about Ohio than I do, but Senator, I know that you've been involved in these budget fights before. You're now going to be part of this new conference committee. What is the realistic prospects that we're not right back here again with the same sort of fight in 3-4 months' time?
Well, look, you have to be optimistic. The country's in trouble. We've got a $17 trillion debt. We know where we have to go, which is on the mandatory side of the budget. That's not the part that Congress appropriates every year, but it's 2/3 of the budget, soon to be 76% of the budget, and continuing to grow. So these are critically important programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. It's also interest on the debt. That's the part of the budget that's growing, and that's where we need to focus. The president in his own budget says that we need to do that because he has about $700 billion of changes in mandatory programs.
The president says he's willing to do that in exchange for Republicans once again offering more on the subject of revenue. Are we going to get back to the same gridlock we had before, or is there something different this time?
Yeah, I think there's something different this time. First of all, we just did raise taxes. Remember, at the first of this year, we put $620 billion of people's hard-earned money into the federal treasury. So we just raised taxes substantially. What the president and Democrats are also looking to do, as you know, is to find some relief under the current Budget Control Act, specifically the sequester. And the sequester, for some of us, is also bad with regard to the Department of Defense because it's an arbitrary way that's cutting spending that's not good policy. So I think there's an opportunity here to provide some relief on sequester in exchange for some real changes on the mandatory side, which, by the way, have much more important out-year changes. For instance, some of the changes in the president's own budget in the first 10 years, maybe only 10, 20, 30, 40 billion dollars, which is a lot of change, but in the out years is 4 to 5 to 6 times that, meaning the second 10 years. So I think this is a good substitution for those of us who are concerned about the fiscal health of our country.
I know Sarah's got a question for you.
Yeah, Senator Portman, good to see you again. I just want to ask about this idea of governing by crisis, kicking the can down the road. Do you see this kind of fight developing again in January and February?
Well, look, as I just said to Peter, I think there's a way forward here. We've got to do something to pay some sort of a down payment on the debt, because if we don't do that, we will have failed, just as we failed this last couple of weeks to do anything about the underlying problem. And then we can substitute some of sequester, which is in the Budget Control Act, with some of these mandatory changes. So I think there's a way forward here. I think that if you look at the president's own budget, he's got suggestions there. I also think that we need to stop this crisis management in terms of the government shutdown by putting in place legislation such as the one I introduced that you guys have talked about on the air before, which is to say you have an automatic continuation of the previous year's spending if you get to the end of the fiscal year and you haven't concluded an appropriations bill, and then it's reduced slowly over time. That would get the appropriations bills back on track.
You've got bipartisan support for that, don't you?
We do have bipartisan support. I mean, I've got a Democrat who's the co-sponsor. We got a few Democrats to support it last time around. Every Republican supported it in the Senate except 2. So it makes sense. What it does is, again, it encourages the Appropriations Committee to do their work. The reason we have these so-called continuing resolutions is we're not doing our job up here. You know, Congress is not appropriating like it should. That includes oversight. It includes prioritizing spending. And in order to encourage people to do what they're hired to do and get that done, I think this will be very helpful.
David Plouffe is with us. He is a Bloomberg contributing editor, formerly of the White House. He said that the Republican Party is in a civil war. Senator Portman, how would you describe the state of the Republican Party right now?
I think we're unified in the things we talked about this morning. The Republican Party is insistent that we, one, not break the Budget Control Act caps, and we didn't do that in this last round, which is something the Democrats wanted to do. The Republican Party does not want to raise income taxes because we know that would be terrible on an already weak economy. We didn't do that, and we're not going to do that going forward, in my view. These are things the Republican Party agrees on. Third, the Republican Party believes that Obamacare is lousy policy, and we see in the rollout it's even worse than we expected. So I think the party is together on the basic issues. And by the way, the American people are with us on those issues as well. Most Americans do believe the government can't continue to spend more than it takes in, that we need to have a health care system that enables people to keep the health care they have and doesn't increase these costs dramatically. So I think we're not only together as a party on these fundamental issues, I think most folks are with us. Where we differed, obviously, was on tactics over the last few weeks.
And Senator, is it fair to say at this point, final question, that you all have taken a hit politically? You've seen the poll numbers. This has not been a good 3-week stretch for the Republican Party.
Well, yeah, it hasn't been a good 3-week stretch for anybody. I think the approval of Congress is now less than 10%, which is, as John McCain says, that's blood relatives and staff. I mean, so look, it hasn't been good for the Republican Party. It hasn't been good for the president or Democrats. It hasn't been good for our institutions here in Washington because we aren't doing the people's business, which is to get at this underlying problem. People are not happy about raising the debt limit when you don't deal with the underlying problem. They understand it. It's like their credit card. You max out in their credit card. You don't just go to the bank and say, I want to extend the limit. What you do is you deal with the underlying problem, which is the overspending.
All right, Senator Portman, thanks for the time. Good luck in the Budget Conference Committee. That's the latest from here on Capitol Hill. Sarah, we'll send it back to you in New York.